perceive the grossness of their past errors, renounce their allegiance to a cause so unjust and disgraceful, and at once enroll themselves among the hosts of freedom and the friends of universal liberty. There are 31 states in the Union. Let them drop California or any other new free state, and then institute 15 comparisons, first comparing New York with Virginia, Pennsylvania with Carolina, Massachusetts with Georgia, and so on, until they have exhausted the catalog. Then, for once, let them be bold enough to listen to the admonitions of their own souls, and if they do not soon start to their feet demanding the abolition of slavery, it will only be because they have reasons for suppressing their innermost sentiments. Whether we compare the old free states with the old slave states, or the new free states with the new slave states, the difference, unmistakable and astounding, is substantially the same. All the free states are alike, and all the slave states are alike. In the former, wealth, intelligence, power, progress, and prosperity are the prominent characteristics. In the latter, poverty, ignorance, imbecility, inertia, and extravagance are the distinguishing features. To be convinced, it is only necessary for us to open our eyes and look at the facts, to examine the statistics of the country, to free ourselves from obstinacy and prejudice, and to unbar our minds to the convictions of truth. Let figures be the umpire. Close attention to the preceding and subsequent tables is all we ask. So soon as they shall be duly considered and understood, the primary object of this work will have been accomplished. Not content with eating out the vitals of the South, slavery, true to the character which it has acquired for insatiety and rapine, is beginning to make rapid encroachments on new territory, and as a basis for a few remarks on the blasting influence which it is shedding over the broad and fertile domains of the West, which, in accordance with the views and resolutions offered by the immortal Jefferson, should have been irrevocably dedicated to freedom, we beg leave to call the attention of the reader to another presentation of the philosophy of free and slave labor, says the North American United States Gazette. We have but to compare the states possessing equal natural advantages to which the two kinds of labor are employed in order to decide with entire confidence which kind is more profitable. At the origin of the government, Virginia, with a much larger extent of territory than New York, contained a population of 750,000 and sent 10 representatives to Congress, while New York contained a population of 340,000 and sent 6 representatives to Congress. Behold how the figures are reversed. The population of New York is 3.5 millions, represented by 33 members in Congress, while the population of Virginia is but little more than 1.5 millions, represented by 13 members in Congress. It is the vital sap of free labor that makes the one tree so thrifty and vigorous, so capable of bearing with all ease the fruit of such a population, and it is slave labor which strikes a decadence through the other, drying up many of its branches with a fearful sterility, and rendering the rest but scantily fruitful, really incapable of sustaining more. Look at Ohio, teeming with inhabitants, its soil loaded with every kind of agricultural wealth, its people engaged in every kind of freedom's diversified employments, abounding with numberless happy homes, and with all the trophies of civilization, and it exhibits the magic effects of free labor, waking a wilderness into life and beauty, while Kentucky, with equal or superior natural advantages, nature's very garden in this western world, which commenced its career at a much earlier date and was in a measure populous when Ohio was but a slumbering forest, but which in all the elements of progress is now left far, very far behind its young rivals, shows how slave labor hinders the development of wealth among a people and brings a blight on their prosperity. The one is a grand and beautiful poem in honor of free labor. The other is a humble confession to the world of the inferiority of slave labor. Equally significant is the testimony of Daniel R. Goodloe of North Carolina, who says, "The history of the United States shows that while the slave states increase in population less rapidly than the free, there is a tendency in slave society to diffusion greater than is exhibited by free society. In fact, diffusion or extension of area is one of the necessities of slavery, the prevention of which is regarded so directly and immediately menacing to the existence of the institution. This arises from the almost exclusive application of slave labor to the one occupation of agriculture and the difficulty, if not impossibility, of diversifying employments. Free society, on which the contrary, has indefinite resources of development within a restricted area, it will far excel slave society in the cultivation of the ground, first on account of the superior intelligence of the laborers, and secondly, in consequence of the greater and more various demands upon the earth's products, where commerce, manufactures, and the arts abound. Then, these arts of life, by bringing men together in cities and towns and employing them in the manufacture or transportation of the raw materials of the farmer, gives rise to an indefinite increase of wealth and population. The confinement of a free people within narrow limits seems only to develop new resources of wealth, comfort, and happiness, while slave society, pent up, withers and dies. It must continually be fed by new fields and forests, to be wasted and wilted under the poisonous tread of the slave. Were we simply a free soiler or anything else less than a thorough and uncompromising abolitionist, we should certainly tax our ability to the utmost to get up a cogent argument against the extension of slavery over any part of our domain where it does not now exist. But as our principles are hostile to the institution even where it does exist, and therefore by implication and in fact more hostile still to its introduction into new territory, we forbear the preparation of any special remarks on this particular subject. With regard to the unnational and demoralizing institution of slavery, we believe the majority of Northern people are too scrupulous. They seem to think that it is enough for them to be mere free soilers, to keep in check the diffusive elements of slavery and to prevent it from crossing over the bounds within which is now regulated by municipal law. Remiss in their national duties, as we contend, they make no positive attack upon the institution in the southern states. Only a short while since, one of their ablest journals, the North American and United States Gazette, published in Philadelphia, made use of the following language: "With slavery in the states, we make no pretense of having anything politically to do. For better or worse, the system belongs solely to the people of those states and is separated by an impassable gulf of state sovereignty from any legal intervention of ours. We cannot vote it down any more than we could vote down the institution of caste in Hindustan or abolish polygamy in the Sultan's dominions. Thus, precluded from all political action in reference to it, prevented from touching one stone of the edifice, not the slightest responsibility attaches to us as citizens for its continued existence. But on the question of extending slavery over the free territories of the United States, it is our right, it is our imperative duty to think, to feel, to speak, and to vote. We cannot interfere to cover the shadow of slavery with the sunshine of freedom, but we can interfere to prevent the sunshine of freedom from being eclipsed by the shadow of slavery. We can interpose to stay the progress of that institution which aims to drive free labor from its own heritage. Kansas should be divided up into countless homes for the ownership of men who have a right to the fruit of their own labors. Free labor would make it bud and blossom like the rose, would cover it with beauty and draw from it boundless wealth, would throng it with population, would make states, nations, empires out of it, prosperous, powerful, intelligent, and free, illustrating on a wide theater the beneficent ends of Providence in the formation of our government to advance and elevate the millions of our race, and, like the heart of the body, from its central position, sending out on every side, far and near, the vital influence of freedom and civilization. May that region, therefore, be secured to free labor." Now we fully and heartily endorse every line of the latter part of this extract, but with all due deference to our sage contemporary, we do most emphatically dissent from the sentiments embodied in the first part. Pray permit us. Have the people of the North no interest in the United States as a nation, and do they not see that slavery is a great injury and disgrace to the whole country? Do they not, in days that tried men's souls, strike as hard blows to secure the independence of Georgia as they did in defending the liberties of Massachusetts? And is it not notoriously true that the Toryism of South Carolina prolonged the war 2 years at least? Is it not, moreover, equally true that the oligarchs of South Carolina have been unmitigated pests and bores to the general government ever since it was organized, and that the free and conscientious people of the North are virtually excluded from her soil in consequence of slavery? It is a well-known and incontestable fact that the northern states furnished about 2/3 of all the American troops engaged in the Revolutionary War, and though they were neither more or less brave or patriotic than their fellow soldiers of the South, yet inasmuch as the independence of our country was mainly secured by virtue of their numerical strength, we think they ought to consider it not only their right but their duty to make a firm and decisive effort to save the states which they fought to free from falling under the yoke of a worse tyranny than that which overshadowed them under the reign of King George III. Freemen of the North, we earnestly entreat you to think of these things. Hitherto, as mere free soilers, you have approached but halfway to the line of your duty. Now for your own sakes and ours, and for the purpose of perpetuating this glorious republic which your fathers and our fathers founded in septennial dreams of blood, we ask you in all seriousness to organize yourself as one man under the banners of liberty and to aid us in exterminating slavery, which is the only thing that militates against our complete aggrandizement as a nation. In this extraordinary crisis of affairs, no man can be a true patriot without first becoming an abolitionist. A free soiler is only a tadpole in an advanced state of transformation. An abolitionist is the full and perfectly developed frog. And here, perhaps, we may be pardoned for the digression necessary to show the exact definition of the terms abolish, abolition, and abolitionist. We have looked in vain for an explanation of the significance of these words in any Southern publication, for no dictionary has ever yet been published in the South, nor is there to be the least probability that one ever will be published within her borders until slavery is abolished. But thanks to heaven, a portion of this continent is what our revolutionary fathers and the fathers of our Constitution fought and labored and prayed to make it, a land of freedom, of power, of progress and prosperity, of intelligence, of religion, literature, commerce, science, of arts, of agriculture, of manufactures, ingenuity, of enterprise, of wealth, of renown, of goodness, and of grandeur. From that glorious part of our confederacy, from the north, whence on account of slavery in the South we are under the humiliating necessity of procuring almost everything that is useful or ornamental, from primers to Bibles, from wafers to printing presses, from ladles to locomotives, and from portfolios to portraits and pianos, comes to us a huge volume bearing the honored name of Webster. Noah Webster, who after 35 years of unremitting toil completed a work which is, we believe, throughout Great Britain and the United States, justly regarded as the standard vocabulary of the English language, and in it the term abolish, abolition, and abolitionist are defined as follows. Abolish, VT, to make void, to annul, to abrogate, applied chiefly and appropriately to establish laws, contracts, rights, customs, and institutions, as to abolish laws by a repeal, actual or ritual, to destroy or put an end to, as to abolish idols. Abolition, the act of abolishing, the state of being abolished, and annulling, abrogation, utter destruction, as the abolition of laws, decrees, or ordinances, rights, customs, etc. The putting to an end of slavery, emancipation. Abolitionist, a person who favors abolition or the immediate emancipation of the slaves. There, gentlemen of the South, you have the definitions of the transitive verb abolish and its two derivative nouns, abolition and abolitionist. Can you, with the keenest possible penetration of vision, detect in either of these words even a tittle of opprobrium which the oligarchs in their wily and inhuman efforts to enslave all the working classes, irrespective of race and color, have endeavored to attach to them? We know you cannot. Abolition is but another name for patriotism, and its other special synonyms are generosity, magnanimity, reason, prudence, wisdom, religion, progress, justice, and humanity. And here, by the way, we may as well explain whom we refer to when we speak of gentlemen of the South. We say, therefore, that, deeply impressed with the conviction that slavery is a great social and political evil, a sin and a crime in the fullest sense, whenever we speak of gentlemen of the South or of gentlemen of anywhere, or at whatever time and whatever connection we may speak of gentlemen, we seldom allude to slaveholders, for the simple reason that, within a few exceptions, we cannot conscientiously recognize them as gentlemen. It is only in those rare instances when the crime is mitigated by circumstances over which the slaveholder has no control, or where he himself, convinced of the impropriety or the folly and wickedness of the institution, is anxious to abolish it, that we can sincerely apply to him the sacred appellation in question, an appellation which we would no sooner think of applying to a pro-slavery slaveholder or any other pro-slavery man than we would think of applying it to a border ruffian, a thief, or a murderer. Let it be understood, however, that the rare instances of which we speak are less rare than many persons may suppose. We are personally acquainted with several slaveholders in North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia, who have unreservedly assured us that they were disgusted with the institution, and some of them went so far as to say they would be glad to acquiesce in the provision of a statute which would make it obligatory on them all to manumit their slaves without the smallest shadow or substance of compensation. These, we believe, are the sentiments of all the respectable and patriotic slaveholders who have eyes to see and ears to hear, who, perceiving the impoverishing and degrading effects of slavery, are unwilling to entail it on their children, and who, on account of their undeviating adherence to truth and justice, are, like the more intelligent non-slaveholders, worthy of being regarded as gentlemen in every sense of the term. Such slaveholders were Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and other illustrious Virginians who, in the language of the great chief himself, declared it among their first wishes to see some plan adopted by which slavery in this country may be abolished by law. The words embraced within this quotation were used by Washington in a letter to John F. Mercer, dated September 9th, 1786, a letter from which we shall quote more freely hereafter, and we think his emphatic use of the participle abolish at this early day is proof positive that the glorious father of the country is entitled to the first place in the calendar of primitive American abolitionists. It is against slavery on the whole and against slaveholders as a body that we wage an exterminating war. Those persons who, under the infamous slave laws of the South, laws which have been correctly spoken of as a disgrace to civilization and which must be annulled simultaneously with the abolition of slavery, have had the vile institution entailed on them contrary to their wills, are virtually on our side. We may, therefore, very properly strike them off from the blacklist of 347,000 slaveholders, who as a body have shocked the civilized world with their barbarous conduct, and from whose conceited and presumptuous ranks are selected the officers who do all the legislation, town, county, state, and national, for, parentheses against, 5 million of poor outraged whites and 3 million of enslaved Negroes. Non-slaveholders of the South, farmers, mechanics, and working men, we take this occasion to assure you that the slaveholders, the arrogant demagogues whom you have elected to offices of honor and profit, have hoodwinked you, trifled with you, and used you as mere tools for consummation of their wicked designs. They have purposely kept you in ignorance, and have, by molding your passions and prejudices to suit themselves, induced you to act in direct opposition to your dearest rights and interests. By a system of gross subterfuge and misrepresentation, and in order to avert for a season the vengeance that will most assuredly overtake them ere long, they have taught you to hate the abolitionists, who are your best and only true friends. Now, as one of your own number, we appeal to you to join us in our patriotic endeavors to rescue the generous soil of the South from the usurped and desolating control of these political vampires. Once and forever, at least so far as this country is concerned, the infernal question of slavery must be disposed of. A speedy and perfect abolishment of the whole institution is the true policy of the South, and this is the policy which we propose to you. Will you aid us? Will you assist us? Will you be freemen, or will you be slaves? Those are questions of vital importance. Weigh them well in your minds. Come to a prudent and firm decision, and hold yourselves in readiness to act in accordance therewith. You must either be for us or against us, anti-slavery or pro-slavery. It is impossible for you to occupy a neutral ground. It is as certain as fate itself that if you do not voluntarily oppose the usurpations and outrages of the slavocrats, they will force you into involuntary compliance with their infamous measures. Consider well the aggressive, fraudulent, and despotic power which they have exercised in the affairs of Kansas, and remember that if, by adhering to erroneous principles of neutrality or non-resistance, you allow them to force the curse of slavery on that vast and fertile field, the broad area of all the surrounding states and territories, the whole nation, in fact, will soon fall prey to their diabolical intrigues and machinations. Thus, if you are not vigilant, they will take advantage of your neutrality and make you and the others the victims of their inhuman despotism. Do not reserve strength of your arms until you shall have been rendered powerless to strike. The present is the proper time for action. Under all the circumstances, apathy or indifference is a crime. First ascertain, as nearly as you can, the precise nature and extent of your duty, and then, without a moment's delay, perform it in good faith. To facilitate you in determining what considerations of right, justice, and humanity require at your hands is one of the primary objects of this work, and we shall certainly fail in our desire if we do not accomplish our tasks in a manner acceptable to God and advantageous to man. But we are carrying this chapter beyond all ordinary bounds, and yet there are many important particulars in which we have drawn no comparison between the free and the slave states. The more weighty remarks which we have intended to offer in relation to the new states of the West and Southwest, free and slave, shall appear in the succeeding chapters. With regards to agriculture and all the multifarious interests of husbandry, we deem it quite unnecessary to say any more. Cotton has been shorn of its magic power and is no longer king. Dried grass, commonly called hay, it seems is the rightful heir to the throne. Commerce, manufacture, literature, and other important subjects shall be considered as we progress. Now that's the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. How can slavery be abolished? Preliminary to our elucidation of what we conceive to be the most discreet, fair, and feasible plan for the abolition of slavery, we propose to offer a few additional reasons why it should be abolished. Among the 1,001 arguments that present themselves in support of our position, which, before we part with the reader, we shall endeavor to define so clearly that it shall be regarded as ultra only by those who imperfectly understand it, it is the influence which slavery invariably exercises in depressing the value of real estate, and as this is a matter which the non-slaveholders of the South, of the West, and of the Southwest are most deeply interested, we shall discuss it in a sort of preamble of some length. The oligarchs say we cannot abolish slavery without infringing on the rights of property. Again, we tell them we do not recognize property in man. But even if we did, and if we were to inventory the Negroes at quadruple the value of their last assessment, still, impelled by a sense of duty to others, and as a matter of simple justice to ourselves, we, the non-slaveholders of the South, would be fully warranted in emancipating all of the slaves at once, and that too without any compensation whatever to those who claim to be their absolute masters and owners. We will explain. In 1850, the average value per acre of land in the northern states was $28.07, in the southwestern $11.39, in the southern $5.34, and in the southwestern $6.26. Now, in consequence of numerous natural advantages, among which may be enumerated the greater mildness of climate, richness of soil, deposits of precious metals, abundance and spaciousness of harbors, and super-excellence of water power, we contend that had it not been for slavery, the average value of land in all the southern and southwestern states would have been at least equal to the average value of the same in the northern. We conclude, therefore, and we think the conclusion is founded on the principle of equity, that you, the slaveholders, are indebted to us, the non-slaveholders, in the sum of $22.73, which is the difference between $28.07 and $5.34 on every acre of southern soil, in our possession. This claim we bring against you because slavery, which has inured exclusively to your own benefit, if it has been beneficial at all, has shed a blighting influence over our lands, thereby keeping them out of the market and damaging every acre to the amount specified. Sirs, are you ready to settle the account? Let us see how much it is. There are in the 15 slave states 346,048 slaveholders and 544,926,720 acres of land. Now the object is to ascertain how many acres are owned by slaveholders and how many by non-slaveholders. Suppose we estimate 500 acres as an average landed property of each slaveholder. Will that be fair? We think it will, taking into consideration the fact that 174,503 of the whole number of slaveholders hold less than 5 slaves each, 68,820 holding only 1 each. According to this hypothesis, the slaveholders own 173,024,000 acres, and the non-slaveholders the balance, with the exception of about 40 million acres which belong to the general government. Thus the case may be stated thus. Area of the slave states, 544,926,720 acres. Acres owned by slaveholders, 173,024,000. Acres owned by the government, 40 million. And that takes it to 213,024,000. Acres owned by non-slaveholders, 331,902,720. Now, chevaliers of the lash and worshippers of slavery, the total value of 331,902,720 acres at $22.73 per acre is $7,544,148,825. And this is our account against you on a single score, considering how your villainous institution has retarded the development of our commercial and manufacturing interests, how it has stifled the aspirations of inventive genius, and how, above all, it has barred us from the heaven-born sweets of literature and religion, concernments too sacred to be estimated in a pecuniary point of view. Might we not, with perfect justice and propriety, duplicate the amount and still be accounted modest in our demands? Fully advised, however, of your indignant circumstances, we feel it would be utterly useless to call on you for the whole amount that is due us. We shall, therefore, in your behalf make another draft on the fund of the non-slaveholding generosity, and let the account, meager as it is, stand as above. Though we have given you all offices, and you have given us none of the benefits of legislation, though we have fought the battles of the South, while you are either lolling in your piazzas or playing the Tory and endeavoring to filch up from us our birthright of freedom, though you have absorbed the wealth of our communities in sending your own children to northern seminaries and colleges, or in employing Yankee teachers to officiate exclusively in your own families, and have refused to us the limited privilege of common schools, though you have scorned to patronize our mechanics and our industrial enterprises, and you have passed to the North for every article of apparel, utility, and adornment, and though you have maltreated, outraged, and defrauded us in every relation of life, civil, social, and political, yet we are willing to forgive and forget you if you will do but us justice on a single account. Of you, the introducers, aiders, and abettors of slavery, we demand indemnification for the damage our lands have sustained on account thereof. The amount of that damage is $7,544,148,825. And now, sirs, we are ready to receive the money, and if it is perfectly convenient to you, we would be glad to have you pay in specie. It will not avail you, sirs, to parley or prevaricate. We must have a settlement. Our claim is just and overdue. We have already indulged you too long. Your criminal extravagance has almost ruined us. We are determined that you shall no longer play the profligate and fare sumptuously every day at our expense. How do you propose to settle? Do you offer us your Negroes in part payment? We do not want your Negroes. We would not have them at all, nor any number of them, even as a gift. We hold ourselves above the disreputable and iniquitous practice of buying, selling, and owning slaves. What we demand is damages in money or other absolute property as an equivalent for the pecuniary losses we have suffered at your hands. You value your Negroes at $1,600 million and propose to sell them to us for that sum. We should consider ourselves badly cheated and disgraced for all time, here and hereafter, if we were to take them off your hands at 16 farthings. We tell you emphatically, we are firmly resolved never to degrade ourselves by becoming the mercenary purchasers or proprietors of human beings, except for the purpose of liberating them. We would not give a handkerchief or a toothpick for all of the slaves in the world. But in order to show you how brazenly absurd are the howls and groans which you invariably set up for compensation, whenever we speak of the abolition of slavery, we will suppose your Negroes are worth all you ask for them, and that we are bound to secure you every cent of the sum before they can become free, in which case our accounts would stand thus: non-slaveholders' accounts against slaveholders, 7,544,148,825, slaveholders' accounts against non-slaveholders, 1,600,000,000. Balance due non-slaveholders, 5,944,148,825. Now, sirs, we ask you in all seriousness, is it not true that you have filched from us nearly 5 times the amount of the assessed value of your slaves? Why then do you still clamor for more? Is it your purpose to make the game perpetual? Think you that we will ever continue to bow at the wave of your wand, that we will bring humanity into everlasting disgrace by licking the hand that smites us, and that with us there is no point beyond which forbearance ceases to be a virtue? Sirs, if these be your thoughts, you are laboring under a most fatal delusion. You can goad us no further, you shall oppress us no longer. Heretofore, earnestly but submissively, we have asked you to redress the more atrocious outrages which you have perpetrated against us, but what has been the invariable fate of our petitions? With scarcely a perusal, with a degree of contempt that added insult to injury, you have laid them at the table, and from thence they have been swept into the furnace of oblivion. Henceforth, sirs, we are demandants, not suppliants. We demand our rights, nothing more, nothing less. It is for you to decide whether we are to have justice peaceably or by violence, or whatever consequences may follow. We are determined to have it one way or the other. Do you aspire to become the victims of white non-slaveholding vengeance by day and of barbarous massacre by the Negroes at night? Would you be instrumental in bringing upon yourselves, your wives, your children, a fate too horrible to contemplate? Shall history cease to cite as an instance of unexampled cruelty the massacre of St. Bartholomew, because the world, the South, shall have furnished a more direful scene of atrocity and carnage? Sirs, we would not wantonly pluck a single hair from your heads, but we have endured long enough. We have endured much. Slaves only of the most despicable class would endure more. An enumeration or classification of all the abuses, insults, wrongs, injuries, usurpation, and oppressions to which you have subjected us would fill a larger volume than this. It is our purpose, therefore, to speak only of those that affect us most deeply. Out of our effects you have long since overpaid yourselves for your Negroes, and now, sirs, you must emancipate them, speedily emancipate them, or we will emancipate them for you. Every non-slaveholder in the South is, or ought to be, and will be against you. You yourselves ought to join us at once in the laudable crusade against the mother of harlots. Slavery has polluted and impoverished your lands. Freedom will restore them to their virgin purity and add from $20 to $30 to the value of every acre. Correctly speaking, emancipation will cost you nothing. The moment you abolish slavery, that very moment will the putative value of the slave become actual value in the soil. Though there are 10 millions of people in the South, and though you, the slaveholders, are only 347,000 in number, you have within a fraction of 1/3 of all the territory belonging to the 15 slave states. You have a landed estate of 173,024,000 acres, the present average market value of which is only $5.34 per acre. Emancipate your slaves on Wednesday morning, and on Thursday following, the value of your lands, and ours too, will have increased to an average of at least $28.07 per acre. Let us see, therefore, even in this one particular, whether the abolition of slavery will not be a real pecuniary advantage to you. The present total market value of all your landed property at $5.34 per acre is only $923,248,160. With the beauty and sunlight of freedom beaming on the same estate, it will be worth, at $28.07 per acre, $4,856,873,680. The former sum, deducted from the latter, leaves a balance of $3,933,535,520, and to the full extent of this amount will your lands be increased in value whenever you abolish slavery, that is, provided you abolish it before it completely dries up all the organs of increase. Here is a more manifest and distant statement of the case. Estimated value of slaveholders' lands after slavery shall have been abolished, $4,856,783,680. Present value of slaveholders' lands, $923,248,160. Probable aggregate enhancement of value, $3,933,535,520. Now, sirs, this last sum is considerably more than twice as great as the estimated value of your Negroes, and those of you, if any there be, who are yet heirs to sane minds and honest hearts, must, it seems to us, admit that the bright prospect which freedom presents for a wonderful increase in the value of real estate, ours as well as yours, to say nothing of 1,000 other kindred considerations, ought to be quite sufficient to induce all of the Southern states in their sovereign capacity to abolish slavery at the earliest practical period. You yourselves, instead of losing anything by the emancipation of your Negroes, even though we suppose them to be worth every dime of $1,600,000,000, would, in one particular, the increased value of land, realize a net profit of over 2,300 millions of dollars. Here are the exact figures. Net increment of value which it is estimated will accrue to the slaveholders' lands in consequence of the abolition of slavery, $3,933,535,520. Putative value of the slaves, $1,600,000,000. Slaveholders' estimate net landed profits of emancipation, $2,333,535,520. What is the import of these figures? They are full of meaning. They proclaim themselves the financial intercessors for freedom, and with that open-hearted liberality which is so characteristic of the sacred cause in whose behalf they plead, they propose to pay you upward of 3,900 millions of dollars for the very property which you, in all the reckless extravagance of your inhuman avarice, could not find a heart to price at more than 1,600 millions. In other words, your own lands, groaning and languishing under the monstrous burden of slavery, announce their willingness to pay you all you ask for the Negroes, and offer you besides a bonus of more than 2,300 millions of dollars, if you will but convert those lands into free soil. Our lands also cry aloud to be spared from the further pollutions and desolations of slavery, and now, sirs, we want to know explicitly whether or not is your intention to heed these lamentations of the ground. We want to know whether you are men or devils, whether you are entirely selfish and cruelly dishonest, or whether you have any respect for the rights of others. We, the non-slaveholders of the South, have many very important interests at stake, interests which heretofore you have steadily despised and trampled underfoot, but which henceforth we shall foster and defend in utter defiance of all the unhallowed influences which it is possible for you or any other class of slaveholders or slave breeders to bring against us. Not the least among these interests is our landed property, which to command a decent price only needs to be disencumbered of slavery. In his present condition, we believe man exercises one of the noblest virtues with which heaven has endowed him, when, without taking any undue advantage of his fellow man, and with a firm, unwavering purpose to confine his expenditures to the legitimate pursuits and pleasures of life, he covets money and strives to accumulate it. Entertaining this view and having no disposition to make an improper use of money, we are free to confess that we have a greater penchant for $28 than for $5, for $90 than for $15, for $1,000 than for $100. South of Mason and Dixon's line, we, the non-slaveholders, have 331,902,720 acres of land, the present average market value of which, as we previously stated, is only $5.34 per acre. By abolishing slavery, we expect to enhance the value to an average of at least $28.07 per acre, and thus realize a net increase of wealth more than $7,500 million. The hope of realizing smaller sums has frequently induced men to perpetrate acts of injustice. We can see no reason why the certainty of becoming immensely rich in real estate or other property should make us falter in the performance of a sacred duty. As illustrative of our theme, a bit of personal history may not be out of place in this connection. Only a few months have elapsed since we sold to an elder brother an interest we held in an old homestead which was willed to us many years ago by our dear departed father. This tract of land, containing 200 acres or thereabouts, is situated 2.5 miles west of Mocksville in the capital of Davie County, North Carolina, and is very nearly equally divided by Bear Creek, a small tributary of the South Yadkin River. More than one-third of this tract, on which we have plowed and hoed and harrowed many a long summer without ever suffering from the effects of coup de sol, is under cultivation. The remaining portion is well-timbered forest, which, without being very particular, we counted while hunting through it not long since 63 different kinds of indigenous trees, to say nothing of either coppice, shrubs, or plants, among which the hickory, oak, ash, beech, birch, and black walnut were most abundant. No turpentine or rosin is produced in our part of the state, but there are, on the place of which we speak, several species of the genus Pinus, by the light of whose flammable knots is radiated on the content of some half-dozen old books, which by hook or by crook have found their way into the neighborhood. We have been enabled to turn the long winter evenings to our advantage, and have thus partially escaped from the prison grounds of those lostful dungeons of illiteracy in which it has been the constant policy of the oligarchy to keep the masses, the non-slaveholding whites and the Negroes, forever confined. The fertility of the soil may be inferred from the quality and variety of its natural productions. The meadow and the bottom, comprising perhaps an area of 40 acres, are hardly surpassed by the best lands in the valley of the Yadkin. A thorough examination of the orchard will disclose the fact that considerable attention has been paid to the selection of fruits. The buildings are tolerable, the water is good. Altogether, to be frank and nothing more, it is, for its size, one of the most desirable farms in the country, and will at any time command the maximum price of land in western North Carolina. Our brother, anxious to become the sole proprietor, readily agreed to give us the highest market value, which we shall publish by and by. While reading the Baltimore Sun the morning after we had made the sale, our attention was allured to a paragraph headed Sales of Real Estate, from which, among other significant items, we learned that a tract of land containing exactly 200 acres and occupying a portion of one of the rural districts in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania near the Maryland line had been sold the week before at $105.50 per acre. Judging from the amount given in the Sun, we are of the opinion that with regards to fertility of soil, the Pennsylvania tract always has been, is now, and perhaps always will be, rather inferior to the one under special consideration. One is the same size as the other. Both are used for agricultural purposes. In all probability, the only essential difference between them is this: one is blessed with the pure air of freedom, the other is cursed with the malaria of slavery. For our interest in our old homestead, we received a nominal sum amounting to an average of precisely $5.60 per acre. No one but our brother, who was keen for the purchase, would have given us quite so much. And now, pray, let us ask, what does this narrative teach? We shall use few words in explanation. There is an extensive void, but it can be better filled with reflection. The aggregate value of one tract is $21,100, that is, of the other is $1,120. The difference is $19,980. We contend, therefore, in the view of all of the circumstances detailed, that the advocates and retainers of slavery have, in all intents and purposes, defrauded our family out of the last mentioned sum. In like manner, and on the same basis of deduction, we contend that almost every non-slaveholder who either is or has been the owner of real estate in the South would, in a court of strict justice, be entitled to damages. The amount in all cases to be determined with reference to the quality of the land in question. We say this because, in violation of every principle of expediency, justice, and humanity, and in direct opposition to our solemn protests, slavery was foisted on us and has been thus far perpetuated by and through the diabolical intrigues of the oligarchs, and by them alone, and furthermore because the very best agricultural lands in the northern states, being worth from $100 to $175 per acre, there is no possible reason, except slavery, why the more fertile and congenial soils of the South should not be worth at least as much. If on this principle we could ascertain, in the matter of real estate, the total indebtedness of the slaveholders to the non-slaveholders, we should doubtless find the sum quite equivalent to the amount estimated on the preceding page, $7,544,148,825. We have recently conversed with two gentlemen who, to save themselves from the poverty and disgrace of slavery, left North Carolina 6 or 7 years ago, and who are now residing in the territory of Minnesota, where they have accumulated handsome fortunes. One of them had traveled extensively in Kentucky, Missouri, Ohio, Indiana, and other adjoining states, and according to his account, and we know him to be a man of veracity, it is almost impossible for persons at a distance to form a proper conception of the magnitude of the difference between the current value of lands in the free and in the slave states of the West. On one occasion, embarking at Wheeling, he sailed down to the Ohio, Virginia and Kentucky on one side, Ohio and Indiana on the other. He stopped at several places along the river, first on the right bank, then on the left, and so on until he arrived at Evansville. Continuing his trip, he sailed down to Cairo, thence up the Mississippi to the mouth of the Des Moines, having tarried at different points along the route, sometimes in Missouri, sometimes in Illinois. Wherever he landed on free soil, he found it from 1 to 200% more valuable than the slave soil on the opposite bank. If, for instance, the maximum price of land was $8 in Kentucky, the minimum price was $16 in Ohio. If it was $7 in Missouri, it was $14 in Illinois. Furthermore, he assured us that so far as he could learn 2 years ago, when he traveled through the states of which we speak, on the range of prices of agricultural lands in Kentucky was from $3 to $8 per acre, in Ohio from $16 to $40. In Missouri from 2 to 7, in Illinois from 14 to 30, in Arkansas from 1 to 4, in Iowa from 6 to 15. In all the old slave states, as it is well known, there are vast bodies of land that can be bought for the merest trifle. We know an enterprising capitalist in Philadelphia who owns in his individual name in the state of Virginia 130,000 acres, for which he paid only 37.5 cents per acre. Some years ago, in certain parts of North Carolina, several large tracts were purchased at the rate of 25 cents per acre. Hiram Bearden, the distinguished inventor who has frequently seen freedom and slavery side by side, and who is therefore well qualified to form an opinion of their relative influence upon society, says, "Many comparisons might be drawn between the free and the slave states, either of which should be sufficient to satisfy any man that slavery is not only ruinous to free labor and enterprise, but is injurious to morals and blighting to the soil where it exists. The comparison between the states of Michigan and Arkansas, which were admitted to the Union at the same time, will fairly illustrate the difference in value of free and slave labor, as well as the difference of moral and intellectual progress in a free and a slave state. In 1836, these young stars were admitted to the constellation of the Union. Michigan, with one half the extent of territory of Arkansas, challenged her sister state for a 20-year race, and named as her rider, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, unless for the punishment of a crime, shall be tolerated in this state." Arkansas accepted, and the challenge named as her rider, "The General Assembly shall have no power to pass laws for the emancipation of slaves without the consent of the owners." Thus mounted these two states The one free and the other slave started together 20 years ago, and now, having arrived at the end of the proposed race, let us review and mark the progress. Michigan comes out in 1856 with 3 times the population of slave Arkansas, with 5 times the assessed value of farms, farming implements, and machinery, and with 8 times the number of public schools. In the foregoing part of our work, we have drawn comparisons between the old free states and the old slave states, and between the new free states and the new slave states. Had we sufficiently time and space, we might have, with the most significant results, changed this method of comparison by contrasting the new free states with the old slave states. Can the slavocrats compare Ohio with Virginia, Illinois with Georgia, or Indiana with South Carolina without experiencing the agony or inexpressible shame? If they can, then indeed has slavery debased them to a lower deep than we care to contemplate. Herewith we present a brief contrast as drawn by a Maryland abolitionist between the most important old slave state and the most important new free state. Virginia was a state wealthy and prosperous when Ohio was a wilderness belonging to her. She gave that territory away, and what is the result? Ohio supports a population of 2 million souls, and the mother contains but 1.5 million, yet Virginia is 1/3 larger than the Buckeye State. Virginia contains 61,000 square miles, Ohio but 40,000. The latter sustains 50 persons to the square mile, while Virginia gives employment to but 25 to the square mile. Notwithstanding Virginia's superiority in years and soil, for she grows tobacco as well as corn and wheat, notwithstanding her immense coal fields and her splendid Atlantic ports, Ohio, the infant state, has 21 representatives in Congress in 1850, while Virginia has but 13, the latter having commenced in the Union with 10 congressmen. Compare the progress of these states and then say, what is it but free labor that has advanced Ohio, and what is it except slavery that can we attribute the non-progression of the Old Dominion? As a striking illustration, the selfish and debasing influences which slavery exercises over the hearts and minds of slaveholders themselves, we will here state the fact that when we, the non-slaveholders, remonstrate against the continuance of such a manifest wrong and inhumanity, a system of usurpation and outrage so obviously detrimental to our interests, they fly into a terrible passion, exclaiming among all other sorts of horrible threats which are not unfrequently executed, "It's none of your business," meaning to say thereby that their slaves do not annoy us, that slavery affects no one except the masters and their chattel personal, and that we should give ourselves no concern about it whatever. To every man of common sense and of honesty and purpose, the preposterousness of this assumption is so evident that any studied attempt to refute it would be a positive insult. Would it be none of our business if they were to bring the smallpox into the neighborhood and with premeditated design let foul contagion spread? Or if they were to throw a pound of strychnine into a public spring, would that be none of our business? Were they to turn a pack of mad dogs loose on the community, would we be performing the part of good citizens by closing ourselves within doors for the space of 9 days, saying nothing to anybody? Smallpox is a nuisance. Strychnine is a nuisance. Mad dogs are a nuisance. Slavery is a nuisance. Slaveholders are a nuisance, and so are the slave breeders. It is our business, nay, it is our imperative duty to abate nuisances. We propose, therefore, with the exception of strychnine, which is the least of all these nuisances, to exterminate this catalog from beginning to end. We mean precisely what our words express when we say we believe thieves are, as a general rule, less amenable to the moral law than slaveholders. And here is the basis of our opinion. Ordinarily, thieves wait until we acquire a considerable amount of property, and then they steal a dispensable part of it, but they deprive no one of physical liberty, nor do they fetter the mind. Slaveholders, on the contrary, by clinging to the most barbarous relic of the most barbarous age, bring disgrace on themselves, their neighbors, and their country, depreciate the value of their own and others' land, degrade labor, discourage energy and progress, prevent non-slaveholders from accumulating wealth, curtail their natural rights and privileges, doom their children to ignorance and all its attendant evils, rob the Negroes of their freedom, throw a damper on every species of manual and intellectual enterprise that is not projected under their own roofs and for their own advantage, and by other means equally at variance with the principles of justice, though but an insignificant fractional part of the population, They constitute themselves the sole arbiters and legislators for the entire South. Not merely so. The thief rarely steals from more than one man out of 100. The slaveholder defrauds 99, and the 100th does not escape him. Again, thieves steal trifles from rich men. Slaveholders oppress poor men and enact laws for the perpetuation of their property. Thieves practice deceit on the wise. Slaveholders take advantage on the ignorant. We contend, moreover, that slaveholders are more criminal than common murderers. We know all slaveholders would not willfully imbue their hands in the blood of their fellow men, but it is a fact, nevertheless, that all slaveholders are under the shield of a perpetual license to murder, the license they have issued to themselves. According to their own infamous statutes, if a slave raises his hand to ward off an unmerited blow, they are permitted to take his life with impunity. We are personally acquainted with 3 ruffians who have become actual murderers under circumstances of this nature. One of them killed 2 Negroes on one occasion. The other 2 have murdered but 1 each. Neither of them has ever been subjected to even the preliminaries of a trial. Not one of them has been arrested. Their own private explanations of the homicide exculpated them from all manner of blame in the premises. They have done nothing wrong in the eyes of the community. The Negroes made an effort to shield themselves from the tortures of a merciless flagellation and were shot dead on the spot. Their murderers still live and are treated as honorable members of society. No matter how many slaves or free Negroes may witness the perpetuation of these atrocious homicides, not one of them is ever allowed to lift up his voice in behalf of his murdered brother. In the South, Negroes, whether bond or free, are never under any circumstances permitted to utter a syllable under oath, except for or against persons of their own color. Their testimony against white persons is of no more consequence than the idle zephyr of the summer. We shall now introduce 4 tables of valuable and interesting statistics to which philosophic and discriminating readers will doubtless have frequent occasions to refer. Tables 22 and 23 will show the area of several states in square miles and in acres, and the numbers of inhabitants to the square mile of each state, also the grand total, or the average of every statistical column. Tables 24 and 25 will exhibit the total number of inhabitants residing in each state according to the census of 1850, the number of whites, the number of free coloreds, and the number of slaves. The recapitulations of these tables will be followed by a complete list of the number of slaveholders in the United States, showing the exact number in each southern state and in the District of Columbia. Most warmly do we commend all these statistics to the studious attention of our reader. Their language is more eloquent than any possible combination of Roman vowels and consonants. We have spared no pains in arranging them so as to express at a single glance the great truths of which they are composed, and we doubt not that the plan we have adopted will meet with general appropriation. Numerically considered, it will be perceived that the slaveholders are in reality a very insignificant class. Of them, however, we shall have more to say hereafter. That was page 142 of the book. Pages 143, 144, 145, 146 are full of statistics that Helper put up there to basically prove his point. It thus appears that there are in the United States 347,525 slaveholders, but this appearance is deceptive. The actual number is certainly less than 200,000. Professor DeBow, the superintendent of the census, informs us that the number includes slave hirers, and furthermore that where the party owns slaves in different counties or in different states, he will be entered more than once. Now, every Southerner who has any practical knowledge of affairs must know, and does know, that every New Year's Day, like almost every other day, is desecrated in the South by publicly hiring out slaves to large numbers of non-slaveholders. The slave owners, who are the exclusive manufacturers of public sentiment, have popularized the dictum that white servants, decency, virtue, and justice are unfashionable, and there are, we are sorry to say, nearly 160,000 non-slaveholding sycophants who have subscribed to this false philosophy and who are giving constant encouragement to the infamous practices of slaveholding and slave breeding by hiring at least one slave every year. In the southern states, as in all other slave counties, there are 3 odious classes of mankind: the slaves themselves, who are cowards; the slaveholders, who are tyrants; and the non-slaveholding slave hirers, who are lickspittles. Whether either class is really entitled to the regards of a gentleman is a matter of grave doubt. The slaves are pitiable, The slaveholders are detestable, the slave hirers are contemptible. With the statistics at our command, it is impossible for us to ascertain the exact number of slaveholders and non-slaveholding slave hirers in the slave states, but we have data which will enable us to approach very near to the facts. The town from which we hail, Salisbury, the capital of Rowan County, North Carolina, contains about 2,300 inhabitants, including 372 slaves, 51 slaveholders, and 43 non-slaveholding slave hirers. Taking it for granted that the town furnishes a fair relative proportion of all the slaveholders and non-slaveholding slave hirers in the slave states, the whole number of the former, including those who have been entered more than once, is 188,551. Of the latter, 158,974. And now estimating that there are in Maryland, Virginia, and other grain-growing states an aggregate of 2,000 slave owners who have cotton plantations stocked with Negroes in the far South and who have been